The moment my daughter said his name, something shifted in my chest. Not a sharp pain, more like the quiet before a storm, when the air goes still and the birds stop singing. I stood at my kitchen counter with my coffee going cold, and I just stood there. "Dad, you still there?" "I'm here," I said, and I steadied my voice the way I had learned to over 64 years, slowly, deliberately, like a man choosing his next step on uncertain ground. "Tell me more about him." She laughed, that bright, unguarded laugh she had inherited from her mother. She told me his name was Derek Paulson, that they had met at a conference in Chicago 6 months ago, that he was kind and funny and treated her better than anyone ever had, that she wanted me to meet him as soon as possible, maybe this Saturday, maybe dinner, maybe the Italian place on Claremont Avenue that she knew I loved. I said yes. I wrote down the name, and then I sat down at my kitchen table and stared at the wall for a very long time. Because I knew that name. Not Derek Paulson exactly, but close enough to stop the air in my lungs, close enough to make my hands go very still on the tabletop. Let me explain who I am first, because it matters. My name is Robert Hale. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer in Columbus, Ohio. I raised my daughter alone after my wife passed. She was 11 years old when we lost her mother, and I was 38, and every decision I made from that point forward had one purpose: to make sure my daughter grew up knowing she was loved and protected. I am not a man who panics. I am not a man who acts on feelings alone. I was trained to look at a structure and identify exactly where it would fail before it ever did. And something about the name Derek Paulson told me this structure would fail. I did not call my daughter back that night. I did not want to say anything I couldn't take back. Instead, I called my oldest friend, a man named Gary, who had worked with me for 20 years and who I trusted with my life. I told him what my daughter had said. I told him the name. "You sure?" Gary asked. "Not completely," I said. "That's why I need your help." Gary was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need?" "Saturday dinner," I said. "Come with me." He didn't ask why. That's the kind of friendship we had. He just said, "What time?" Here is what I want you to understand about the next part. I did not walk into that dinner blind. I did not walk in hoping for the best or telling myself I was overreacting. I was 64 years old. I had made too many mistakes in my life by trusting feelings without facts. So, before Saturday came, I spent 3 days doing what engineers do. I looked at the structure. I found where it was weak. I searched Derek Paulson online and found almost nothing. A LinkedIn profile that was 2 years old. A business website for a consulting firm with no client testimonials, and a registered address that turned out to be a mail forwarding service. A Facebook profile with 53 friends and photos that only went back 18 months. For a man who claimed to be 41 years old and professionally established, that was a remarkable amount of nothing. On Thursday morning, I drove to the county clerk's office and asked for public marriage records. I'm not going to tell you exactly what I was looking for, because at that point I wasn't fully sure myself. But I came home that afternoon with photocopies of 3 documents, and I sat at my kitchen table and I read them twice. Then I called Gary again. "I need you to bring your nephew Saturday night," I said. Gary's nephew worked in IT and had a particular talent for finding publicly available information quickly and putting it together in ways most people couldn't. "Tell him to bring his laptop." "Robert," Gary said slowly, "what exactly did you find?" "Enough to know I need more," I said. Saturday came. My daughter arrived at the restaurant first with her fiancé, and I watched them through the window from across the street for just a moment before Gary and I walked in. I wanted to see him before he saw me. I wanted to watch how he moved, how he held himself, whether his eyes worked the room the way a man's eyes do when he is performing rather than living. He was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of easy smile that some men practice in mirrors. He pulled out my daughter's chair. He laughed at something she said and touched her hand. Everything about him said, "I know exactly what I'm doing." That was the part that worried me most. I walked in, my daughter stood up and hugged me, and I held her for a second longer than usual. Then I shook his hand. His grip was firm and confident, and he looked me directly in the eye, and he said, "Mr. Hale, I have heard so much about you. It's a real honor." "Likewise," I said, and I smiled. And I introduced Gary as my longtime friend who happened to be in the area. He didn't blink. He shook Gary's hand and said, "The more the merrier." My daughter seemed delighted. Over the next 2 hours, Gary's nephew sat in a booth near the back with his laptop, working quietly while Gary and I had dinner with my daughter and her fiancé. I asked Derek questions. Easy questions at first about Chicago, about his work, about where he grew up. He answered smoothly and confidently, filling in a picture of a life in Indianapolis, a degree from Purdue, a consulting career that had taken him to 6 cities in 10 years. I nodded. I listened. And every so often I sent a text under the table to Gary's nephew with a detail, a date, a city, a school name, and waited. About halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed. I excused myself to use the restroom. Gary's nephew met me in the hallway near the restrooms and opened his laptop screen. He had found a marriage record for a Daniel Parsons, different first name, similar last in Indianapolis, filed 8 years ago and never dissolved. The wife's name was Carol. There was a child listed in a subsequent court record, a custody filing from 4 years ago. The address on the filing matched a street in Indianapolis that Derek had casually mentioned as his old neighborhood during dinner. I stood in that hallway and looked at that screen for a long time. Then I thanked Gary's nephew, straightened my jacket, and walked back to the table. I want to be honest with you about what happened inside me in that moment. There was anger, yes. But there was something else underneath it, a cold, clear focus. Because the anger, if I let it out right then, would destroy everything. My daughter would see a father losing his temper at the dinner table. Her fiancé would play the victim. She would feel caught in the middle, and she would defend him. Because that is what love does when it feels threatened before it is ready to let go. I had one job that night, and it was not to win the argument. It was to gather enough that I could not be dismissed. I sat back down. I ordered dessert. I laughed at 2 of Derek's stories. I asked him about his plans for the wedding, and I watched his eyes while he answered, and I noted every single thing that did not match what I had already found. At the end of the night, he picked up the check before I could. My daughter beamed. He shook my hand again and said he hoped this was the first of many dinners. I told him I hoped so too, and I meant it, but not the way he thought I did. On the drive home, Gary said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Then he said, "You handled that well." "I didn't handle anything yet," I said. "What do you need?" "1 more week," I said. And Carol. Finding Carol took 4 days. Gary's nephew found a social media profile through the custody filing address, and through a mutual connection, a woman who had worked at the same company as Carol in Indianapolis, we were able to reach her by phone on a Wednesday afternoon. I was the one who called. I introduced myself carefully. I told her I was not a lawyer or a detective. I told her I was a father, and that I believed the man she knew as Daniel Parsons was now engaged to my daughter under a different name. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Carol said, "How old is your daughter?" 31, I said. Another silence. "I have a son," she said quietly. "He's 7. His father hasn't paid support in 2 years. We went back to court in the spring, and his lawyer said he couldn't be located." She stopped. "He's been living in Chicago this whole time?" "I believe so," I said. "I'm sorry?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What do you need from me?" I told her. She agreed without hesitation. "Now I need to tell you about my daughter, because you need to understand who she is. She is 31 years old. She is a physical therapist who works with veterans. She is the most patient, warm-hearted person I have ever known. She learned that patience the hard way. She was the child who sat by her mother's bed in the hospital and held her hand and told her everything would be all right, even when everyone in the room knew it wouldn't be. She has a gift for seeing the best in people. That gift had kept her safe most of her life. But it was also the door that men like Derek walked through. She had been engaged once before, in her late 20s, to a man who turned out to have a drinking problem he had carefully hidden from her for nearly a year. When that ended, I watched her grieve in the particular way that she did quietly, methodically, without letting anyone carry it for her. She told me once, after it was over, that she just wanted to stop being surprised by people. I had promised myself, after that I would never let her walk into something like that again, if I could help it, not without at least trying. On the Friday evening before I planned to speak to her, I sat in my living room with the documents spread out on the coffee table in front of me. The marriage certificate, the custody filing, a printed page from Carol's attorney confirming the outstanding support order, 3 screenshots from a background search service that Gary's nephew had run through a public records aggregator, showing 2 addresses, one in Indianapolis under Daniel Parsons, one in Chicago under Derek Paulson, active within the same 2-year window. I looked at all of it for a long time. Then I thought about Derek's easy smile, the way he pulled out her chair, the way he said it was a real honor to meet me, and meant none of it. I picked up my phone and called my daughter. "Can you come over tomorrow morning?" I said. "I need to talk to you about something. Just you and me." She could hear something in my voice, I think, because she didn't joke or ask questions. She just said, "I'll be there at 9. She arrived at 9 on the dot with 2 coffees from the place she knew I liked, and she sat across from me at the kitchen table, where I had sat all those years ago watching her do homework, where I had helped her practice her college essays, where we had eaten breakfast together for 13 years after her mother died, and I was all she had. I placed the documents on the table between us. I did not say, "He's a liar." I did not say, "I told you so," or "I knew something was wrong." I did not make it about me at all. I said, "I found some things I think you need to see. I want you to take your time looking at them, and then I want to hear whatever you're feeling, and I will listen to all of it." She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked down at the documents. I watched my daughter read. I watched her go still the way I had gone still in my kitchen 2 weeks earlier when she first said his name. I watched her pick up the marriage certificate and read it slowly. I watched her set it down and pick up the custody filing and read that too. She didn't cry right away. My daughter doesn't cry right away. She processes first. That has always been her way. When she finished, she put the pages down and she looked at the table. Not at me. At the table. "His son is 7, she said. "Yes. He told me he had never been married." "I know." She was quiet. Then she said, "How did you find this?" I told her everything. Every step. From the moment she said his name on the phone to the county clerk's office to Carol's phone call to the documents on the table. I didn't spare myself. I told her I had brought Gary to dinner specifically to have someone help me investigate while we ate, that I had been texting his nephew under the table. I told her the truth about all of it, because she deserved the truth even when it was uncomfortable, and because I never wanted her to feel ambushed or managed. When I finished, she sat with it for a while. Then she said, very quietly, "You didn't tell me anything at dinner." "No," I said. "I didn't have enough yet. And I knew if I said something before I had everything, he would explain it away and you would have to choose between believing me and believing him without anything solid to stand on. I didn't want to put you in that position." She looked at me for a long time. "His son is 7 years old," she said again, and this time her voice broke, just slightly, on the last word. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. And I didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that would make it smaller than it was. She called Derek that afternoon. I was not in the room. She told me later that she didn't give him any warning. She simply said she had found something and she needed him to tell her the truth about Daniel Parsons. She said there was a silence so long she thought the call had dropped. And then he said he could explain. She said, "Then explain." He said the marriage had been a mistake. He said he and Carol had been separated for years. He said the name change was just a professional rebranding. He said the support payments were a misunderstanding. He said he had been going to tell her. He just hadn't found the right time. My daughter said, "Your son is 7 years old. You have had 7 years of right times." And she ended the call. She came back into the kitchen where I was waiting, and she sat down and she looked at the table again. And then she said, "I really thought he was different this time." That is the sentence that has stayed with me since. Not because of the anger in it, there wasn't anger, not yet. Because of what was underneath it, the exhaustion of a person who had been trying so hard, for so long, to believe that the next one would be honest. I said, "He's the one who wasn't different. That's not the same thing as you." She looked at me. "You know what the worst part is? I'm not even mostly sad about losing him. I'm sad for his kid, and that is exactly who my daughter is." In the weeks that followed, Carol was able to use the information about Derek's Chicago address to reopen the support case with her attorney. I connected her with a lawyer I knew through an old colleague who handled exactly these kinds of cases. I do not know how that resolved. That was Carol's story to tell, not mine. But the last time we spoke, she said she finally felt like things were moving. Derek, or Daniel, or whoever he chose to be, he never contacted my daughter again after that call. My daughter told me once, about a month later, that she had looked at his LinkedIn profile and found it had been deleted. She said it with a kind of quiet satisfaction, the way you feel when a piece of furniture you've been meaning to move is finally out of the way. I am telling you this story not because it ends with fireworks or a courtroom or a confrontation where someone throws a glass of water. Life is not usually like that. Usually the ending is quieter than the middle. Usually it looks like your daughter sitting across from you at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, drinking coffee, telling you about a patient at work who finally walked without a cane for the first time, and you realize, watching her face light up, that she is going to be just fine. A man I knew a long time ago told me something I have thought about many times since. He said the hardest part of being a parent isn't protecting your children from the world. It's learning which battles you have to let them fight alone, and which ones you have to step in front of. He said the only way to know the difference is to stay close enough to see it coming and humble enough not to make it about yourself when you do. I almost got that wrong. There was a part of me, that first night when I heard the name, that wanted to call my daughter immediately and say, "Do not marry this man. I have a feeling. Trust me." And if I had done that, she would have had to decide between her father and the man she loved, without a single solid thing in her hand. He would have played innocent. She would have felt torn. And whatever happened after that would have had a shadow over it. Either she would have stayed with him to prove her independence, or she would have left him and wondered for the rest of her life whether she'd been told what to think. Instead, I waited. I prepared. I gave her the truth with her name on it, clean and complete, and I let her decide. That is the only victory worth having. I think about Carol's son sometimes, a 7-year-old boy in Indianapolis who never asked for any of this. I hope things got better for him. I hope his mother found solid ground. I hope someone is there, the way I was there for my daughter, when the moments come that are too heavy to carry alone. To anyone watching who is carrying something like this right now, whether it's a child you're trying to protect or a truth you're afraid to say out loud because you don't have all the pieces yet, I want to say this. Take your time. Gather what you need. Do not let the urgency of fear push you into a corner before you are ready. The truth does not disappear just because you give yourself a week to find all of it. And do not let pride be the reason you wait too long, or fear be the reason you speak too soon. The people who love us deserve better than our fear. They deserve our steadiness, our patience, our willingness to sit across from them at a kitchen table with everything on the surface and say, "Here is what I found, and here is all of it, and I trust you to know what to do with it." That is what love looks like when it is not trying to control, when it is just trying to protect. If this story reached someone today who needed to hear it, then it did exactly what it was meant to do. Thank you for being here. And wherever you're watching from tonight, I hope there is someone in your life who would sit at that kitchen table with you, not to tell you what to think, but to make sure you never have to face the hard things alone. Stay close to those people. They are rarer than they look.